Morning, everybody. Glad to see everybody here on this rainy day. And thank you for supporting Adult Ed. I'm very happy to welcome Jake Grant as our speaker in our My Journey series. So we're going to get the other end of the spectrum. Last time it was Martha Woods with her long extended journey, and now Jake is at the beginning of the journey, and we can all remember when we were at the beginning of our journeys and how that was and how it affected us and how the beginning part affected our journeys long term. And Jake was confirmed at our church. He's been RSG, VBS, everything he's learned from our church. Been in small groups. He was the custodian for our church for 2 years. He is up playing the drums, so I'm sure you recognize him, and he's been around, and so we'll hear where he is in his journey. He's a graduate, just recently graduated from Georgia Tech, and he's living in Atlanta, starting his first job. That's part of his journey too. I'm going to say a quick prayer. Dear God, thank you for bringing Jake here for us. Thank you for his journey. Thank you for supporting him and help uplift him in the times ahead. There are many times ahead where he will need to rely on you and help us if we, as we support each other and support Jake in his journey. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
He's Jake from State Farm, isn't he?
Where it happens to. Yeah. Well, thank you. Just a note before I start, I read this out twice yesterday, and one time it was really fast, and the other time it was way too slow. So I'm going to try and go nice and medium. If I'm talking too fast or too slow, just yell at me. It's fine. But I wrote it all out, so I should be cruising along. Anyways, as Terry said, or as you can probably tell by my Zoom background or the fact that you haven't seen me in a month, I am coming to you live from beautiful, breezy Atlanta, Georgia. It's an honor to join the class this morning, and I very much appreciate the consideration and being asked to share my journey with you guys. Before I dive in, I was told the expectation was that I should talk for 40 or 45 minutes, so you can ask questions at the end and stuff like that. Hopefully, since I do like to ramble, I wrote it out. I don't want to keep you here till 3. I will say I've been in Atlanta for almost 5 years now, and there are certain things I know that I'll bring up that are shorthand or part of everyday speech that may be like unfamiliar. Like when I say North Ave or NAPC, I'm not talking about the street. I'm talking about the church I go to now. It's North Avenue Presbyterian Church in Atlanta. Yeah, I've been going there since I started at Tech, but we'll get in on that. Also, if I say Tech, I'm talking about Georgia Tech secondhand at this point. If there's something like that, just stop me and let me know. I'd rather you guys not get lost in that kind of stuff. But anyways, let me begin. I've had this class on my radar for a while now, since I was asked to share, since I had been home for a little bit after graduation. For the longest time, though, it's just been like thoughts swirling in my head, not really sure what to say, how to say it. But I want to share like my journey with you and make sure what I said resonated, that it mattered, that it was worth hearing. After all, I can say that the people on this call are people who, by a wide margin, are the group that has, shaped who I am as a follower of Christ and as a young man. Of course, I'd be doing my family a disservice not to rank them first, and for that I am boundlessly thankful. But as a church, nobody has had nearly the impact on my life as has you guys that meet weekly at 75:51 quick. Part of this hesitancy to put words to paper too is the cloying sense of inadequacy that I felt. I've been called to speak to people that, since my childhood, have loomed in a somewhat larger than life aspect in my life. Ask any kid who grew up in River Forest, particularly those around our church or the tennis club, what it was like to interact with like Mr. Hancock. As a kid, the adults who shape your life have an almost mythological or legendary scale to them. Same goes for youth leaders and things like that, Big Steve, Scott, Sean, people like them. It's bizarre, really, to be at the point where it's somewhat of a level playing field, so to speak. Who am I wondered, but some kid that used to run around the scout room or dress up in a flannel shirt with his buddies and commandeer the entire manpower of the youth staff to film a show about alliterative pirates. Quite frankly, to start this journey about my journey, this talk about my trials and sorrows and struggles, to paraphrase the beginning half of the scriptural inspiration for the series, off with an unsubtle introduction, I have long wrestled with this feeling of inadequacy. This thought that, well, man, I think I am smart, faithful, but am I really? Am I enough? Am I worthy to, lead kids at Ready, Set, Go? Do I deserve to have a seat in this lecture hall in General Chem? Why the heck does North Ave want me on some strategic planning committee? Stuff like that. Usually, though, when I need to set my jumbled thoughts in order, the best way I've found to process is to hop in the pool or get on my bike and just go. Being a planner, I had a specific ride that I had circled as the Jake figures his stuff out for Sunday school ride. And that would be my Wednesday evening ride across Midtown to get over to North Avenue for choir practice. Yeah, choir practice. As longtime contemporary percussionist, I also think that is a weird development. I basically got conscripted, but that's a whole nother story. Interesting one, but different time. For those that aren't familiar, Atlanta is in some ways a very nice city. The weather is mild in the winter. It's easy to travel through the airport. The food and the music scenes are exciting. And I find it, relative to certain places, pretty affordable, living, taxes, that kind of stuff. Sure, its sports fans are split in equal thirds between loyal Atlanta folks, fair weather bandwagoners, or transients who cling with white knuckles to the teams of their hometown. That's me. But it is certainly a city growing in terms of population, in diversity, and in opportunity. There's one thing, though, that the city is absolutely terrible at, and that is building decent infrastructure. I was not going to make it through this without a throwaway about planes, trains, or sports. So that's your one-liner there. While I could probably rant until next Tuesday about how the city could do well to spend a dime on a commuter rail system or its bipolar bike network, what we're really concerned with right now is the fact that its roads, despite being the focal point of the city and state spend, is basically the quality that you get on the moon, given the plethora of crater-sized potholes. The worst of those roads, though, is 10th Street, which is nearby my apartment. Side note, I've called 10th Street North Avenue for years, given that it's on the north side of campus, while North Ave is on the south, and that is 18 years of living in River Forest. That is never going to leave me. Anyways, I was trying to get from my apartment, cut through campus, and into Midtown to get to church, when 10th Street, which is finally being repaved, managed to puncture my bike tire in one last act of terrible road luck. In my anger and frustration, instead of getting what I wanted to say ordered in my head, I got angry. This wasn't the plan, I thought, and I sweltered and sweated the rest of the way to church, dragging my bike up and over hills. As you all probably know, I really like plans, particularly sticking to them, and have been learning to adapt better when they change. That one's still more of a work in progress. The point is, I did very little thinking and planning and more muttering and waffling. The time I had until today ticked down further. 3 days and one new front tire tube later, I found myself somewhere past Buckhead on a shady trail along one of Atlanta's expressways. In the shade of the trees, which were some respite from the sweltering sun, I was reflecting and coaching myself. A reassuring text or two helped the process as well, but when you think about it, there's a reason that diverse perspectives matter. There had to be a reason I was asked to do this. After all, sure, I still do, even having now been on this call for a little bit, feel a little bit like a kid among adults. But this group has had not insignificant overlap between the folks that hired me to be the janitor, who asked me to speak at my own youth Sunday, or most importantly, sat in the session of elders and heard my testimony of faith on a cold winter night in the social hall as I sought to be a member of this very institution. Suddenly, I felt some worthiness. Not only was I quite literally on a roll, the hills of Atlanta make for quite a different biking experience than if you want hills, you just have to bike back and forth across the Circle Avenue Bridge, across the highway, a bunch of times. But I suddenly was racing down my stream of conscious, and a few key themes kept bubbling back up. Having already brushed past worthiness and sticking to a plan, which we will probably double back on in a bit, I settled on discussing a few other topics. I'd like to talk about cultural Christianity and how we prioritize. In addition, I plan on touching on the concepts of mentorship, relationship, loneliness. We'll take a jaunt through worship and music and end with the concept of home. For those who've not heard my story before, this will start in a relatively, for those who have heard my story before, this will start in a relatively similar place. My goal, of course, is not to rehash a speech I gave in 7th grade or a homily from senior year, but perspectives shift a lot in the passage of time, and the start, I think, is important. As a kid, my family grew up sharing time between St. Luke's and First Baptist, given the differing upbringings of my parents. My father, a downstate Baptist, and my mother, a Chicago Catholic, were married in the Catholic Church, and all three of us children were baptized in it. I may be entering my 2nd decade as a confirmed Presbyterian, but most don't know I'm baptized a Catholic. Eventually, the shared time proved too cumbersome, and Mom and Dad went on the hunt for a new place to call home. Given that I was 6 or 7, the details are hazy to non-existent as to exactly how that went down. All I remember is a party in a backyard somewhere, and then we changed churches. They're still here. I'm talking to you. Clearly, something worked out somewhere. I grew up in a house of faithful people, of people I saw to have good morals, good intentions. I wouldn't have known it at the time, but I took my faith and the faith of my family completely for granted. For the vast majority of my childhood, we prayed as a family every night before bed. It was just what we did. Was everyone's dad not head deacon? Did everyone not go to church on Sunday? That was just my life. God was a part of it. My parents made that abundantly clear. And to the point where the moment where I told my dad I wanted to accept Jesus as my savior, we were literally just driving down Lathrop in River Forest. To his credit, he did his very best attempt to impart on elementary school age me that was a pretty big deal. He tried to tell me why it mattered. I was a confident and sure-headed kid, and I thought that I had this relationship with God thing all locked down. I got him in my corner forever. That was that. But it wasn't. See, I had the privileged experience of growing up in a strong community of faith with 2 loving and God-fearing parents. This is something, like I said, I took completely for granted. I saw my world as a kid as stoic and immutable. Every spring had Little League, just like every year before it. I wasn't in denial about, moving from Roosevelt to Oak Park, but I certainly didn't think that it would alter my world too much. OPRF, not like moving houses. We have lived in the same house forever. Instead of walking to school and having swim practice late at night, I'd take the bus and practice after school. When Conrad and Valerie and Anna would talk about the eventuality of going off to college, I would laugh. It seemed like it would never happen. Change was not in my reality. But that's the thing. Transitions are a very big deal. We could enter down the rabbit hole of talking about friends, mentors, and interpersonal relationships here, but I choose to start with OPRF to illustrate something different, and that being culture. I learned quite quickly that very few people in our town grew up in the situation that many of us came from at First Pres. In this day and age, there are many families and youths who don't know Jesus. The flip side to that coin is that they very much tend to paint with a broad brush when they do meet people who aren't like them. So much of how people who ostensibly identify as Christians come across in the modern American popular conscious is that of bigoted, stuck up, and disconnected rubes. A broad brush, like I said, was painted. Having been in Atlanta for a while now, and being almost a decade since this encounter, it's a bit tricky to capture the poignancy with which I felt my early years at Oak Park. Heck, by the end of it, people would comment things like, I always hear OPRF isn't a friendly place to be a Christian, but you seem to handle it so well. Like a lot of things in life, though, what we see in people isn't the struggle, it's the end product or a false front. For much of those early years, my grips on my relationship with God was tenuous at best. It's at this juncture that we actually do introduce the other broad concept, and that's friendship and mentorship. These have been a critical part of my faith and growth in my relationship with God. I don't think it's coincidence that as my faith was kind of teetering, my interpersonal connections were too. As I assessed my life in high school, I looked around and I noticed 3 things. The first was I saw old friends from school who had dissociated with me. As a known Christian, that was different and weird. I didn't really have much interest in doing shenanigans, you know the ones, I'll spare the details. At the same time, the tight-knit network of church friends and peers I had was more or less dissolving through a combination of things out of my control and my own poor decisions that led to a strong dose of purposeful and intentional neglect on my part. There's obviously still some pang of regret there, but they combine to a strong sense of social isolation. The most important thing, though, was that I kind of knew I needed wisdom. And in particular, wisdom from people who weren't my parents. You've all been teenagers, you know how that is. But I was kind of struggling to find it. As I surveyed the scene, what I saw was that of a mostly unfamiliar set of coaches and teachers, most of whom unfriendly to the faith, a youth pastor with one foot figuratively and then both literally out the door, and a gigantic question mark over the long-term health of my grandfather, with few people in my house really seeming to know either. It was just kind of a weird place to be, and his passing made that search feel more in vain. For those that don't already know, he more than anyone else is the man I did and still do model my faith and life and how I want to, be a Grant man kind of thing on. With my faithful friends and my most important spiritual mentors kind of not really in my life, it was easy to point at God and say, see, you don't care. What about me? What am I supposed to do now? Equally so, the wayward path seemed all the more inviting. It was hard to spend time tending my relationship with God when everything I saw backed me into a corner of loneliness. And I'm not a person who deals with isolation very well. Now, long after the fact, I feel like this is kind of cliche, but bottoming out in relative isolation did teach me plenty more than the good things in life have. But I think brushing it off with today's perspective ignores the very real fact that I felt worthless, cast aside, and didn't really have much interest in the people around me or God. Especially if he would ignore me, I would ignore him. Two-way street. But the problem was he didn't. In hindsight, I don't think God ever left. As much as I was just going through the motions every week and wanted to say, hey, this church thing isn't for me, God isn't working alone. Even on the days when you and I don't consciously know that, hey, this thing that I'm doing is for God's kingdom and it's going to change someone, that's how he works. I was sitting there expecting God to give me friends or my actions to help me out of this corner, or some hope or purpose in the monotony of school, which I was good at, but didn't find a lot of joy in, and swimming, which I liked, but was kind of terrible at the time. Sometime in the middle of that cold Chicago winter, which was not particularly notable in the long arc of cold Chicago winters for its weather, but more for the reality that I saw the sun exactly once between Sunday and Saturday, Sam Hutchins, our new small group leader at the time, I gave him my number, mostly so he would stop asking for it. I don't really know what I would be at right now if it wasn't for that. It's worth noting too, though, that building a relationship is an active process. It's extremely hard to see God in much of anything if you aren't doing anything to seek him out, to communicate with him, to know more of him. Just because someone keeps you in the loop about a small group or because you sit in a pew on Sunday doesn't automatically make you in a relationship with Christ. These are both important things to do to learn about faith and to glorify him, of course, but there's a certain sense of activity in relationship with God that requires deliberate and positive action. After treading water, though doing more things on Sunday, for the better part of a year, the kick in the pants that said it was time to actually do something came in the form of a text from an unknown number asking if I was going to be a leader for Ready, Set, Go. There's an often repeated cliche amongst Georgia Tech folks that Facet, our freshman orientation, is basically just for the leaders. I am absolutely not about to say that this is the case for RSG. Do not mix those words. However, I do think it is worth noting just how valuable it is for the leaders in their faith journey too. At the time, I wasn't too certain if I was worthy of being an RSG leader. I didn't know how I felt about God. Who was he, really? Do I choose to commit to growing to him and glorifying him? If so, I needed to put my money where my mouth was. So before I replied, I started wrestling, figuratively, of course. As I did this, I also wanted to see who the heck was texting me. In this case, it was Maddie Ariema, one-time leader of the RSG worship band and now a youth pastor / seminarian on the other side of the lake. Really, it was the form of praise through music and the community that came with not just being a leader, but spending time in thought, in praise of God, practicing, of putting the time and effort in there that reconnected a skeptical me with the joy in the community of Christ. It was built off of intentionality. But building is a process. It's one that requires a steady commitment and an active pursuit. It's quite important to actually, go out and do it. And it was something that continued this building through the rest of my time in town and as I've been in Atlanta. As we transition, it's also worth tying a bow on one of the secular storylines I mentioned because growth and fulfillment is important, I find. Specifically, that I stuck like glue to the 500 freestyle, notorious as the worst event in high school swimming, which was randomly assigned to me one meet. And it was nice to be not terrible. And with time, I grew deeper bonds, got past the barriers, the walls, and grew into the aquatics, music, and other communities at Oak Park. It would be irresponsible to pretend that that place is completely hopeless, or that I didn't find value in it in the end. I also learned that a lot of difference can be made for others with persistence and tenacity and just modeling biblical love to people. I think a lot of people come into this with, hey, we got to lead with the Jesus. I've found, especially with skeptics, that if you're leading with love, it opens a lot of doors too. Anyways, moving along, I've been in Atlanta for some time now. When I left River Forest for college, I left as a young adult who, for all of his desires to turn a new leaf, to get out of Oak Park, didn't want to leave things like my swim team, my church, my friends, my music. Oh, and Johnny's Italian beef. I hear they make their own Italian ice. Recommend it. So naturally, I did a good old Google search looking for Presbyterian church near me. And the one that came up as closest to campus was conveniently also the one that the new pastor fellow that we had elected after my youth Sunday had emailed me introducing me to. Wow, what a coincidence, a non-Calvinist would say. How's this for timeliness too? My last day as a full-time resident of River Forest, that would be the first day Pastor Paul came to preach to us full-time in the fall of 2016. Luckily for you all, I am in Atlanta basically indefinitely now, so we don't have to trade back or anything. There are a few glaring things about Atlanta that stuck out to this wide-eyed northerner when I first arrived. The first was the heat, or as the locals would say, it's not the heat, it's the humidity. The second was that, for all Atlanta can claim to be the cosmopolitan heart of the South, it's still quite culturally Southern, and not as, I mean, it's still a city that's in the South. It's not like you take the city out of its surroundings. It's not Chicago. It's the cultural Southernness that I find important to our talk today. Much as Oak Park was culturally not Christian, something that came with Atlanta being Southern was that it was culturally quite Christian. A point made all the more befuddling to me when I would hear new acquaintances from the suburbs, the rural areas of Georgia, note things that were wrong, unchristian-like, not godly on campus in this great heathen city. I literally heard that one time, this great heathen city, and I was like, you need to get further out. A common second or third question out of people's mouths actually would be, what church do you go to? They didn't have any reason to ask. That's just something they do. For me, the answer quickly became North Avenue. I stayed at North Ave because in many ways, North Ave felt like home. Same denomination, same broad range of ages, and strong music ministry. I saw diversity of faces and experiences. I figured it was a good place to learn and grow. Lots of different stories. But just because a place feels like home doesn't really make it home. I learned in time that there are certain things that swing the opposite way, as my experiences did in Oak Park. A place can be welcoming, but if you're not making those second and third level interactions or growing a true relationship, it certainly doesn't feel like fellowship. Once again, I felt alone. This time was a little bit different. Soon enough, I had bonded with other boys on my dorm floor enough to call them friends, same for the swim club. I put out an open invite for church, and 4 of us freshmen trudged every week the 2 miles to get to North Ave. Each week, we sat in the 4th pew from the back. We got a nice to see you boys from the lady who always was in the narthex, and much as we tried, we didn't make all that many connections. At least it was a kind of feeling alone together. That's the thing about loneliness. Sometimes you can be completely surrounded by people, and North Ave, there's a couple hundred people every service. In this case, it was people who shared our values, who shared our school, even if removed by a few years, and shared our city. But just as much, it was like watching everyone else watch church on Sunday, watching the world go by. It was almost bizarre of how much of a flip it was to be in this city, which goes for life in, life out of church. It was through this, I learned that when somebody says, bless your heart, it doesn't really feel like they want you to be blessed. It's more that they want to convey that you're kind of an idiot. But for as many different folks as we saw and heard, it was still very much an othering, outsider experience to be Northern boys in the back who said debts in the Lord's Prayer instead of sins and tried our darnest to, remember names. Certainly no one remembered ours. That's the weird thing, though. If you stick around a place long enough, other people become the new strange people. The four of us started a college Sunday school class, which didn't really help us meet other people, mind you, but it gave us some credibility to be the people asked to mentor confirmation students when they needed folks for that. We went to lunches and tried to meet people. As much as busy engineers with evening commitments can't really do things on weekdays, we tried to make the most out of Sunday. Should it have been that hard? No. Did I spend much of that first year, that second year? Honestly, part of that feeling continued up until like 3-4 weeks ago, you know? Was I ambivalent at best about leaving home, family, familiarity, and wanting to see the people I called my true friends? I did do that. Don't do that. That's not healthy. Yeah. And this is also too many rhetorical questions. It's worth noting that this immense barrier to reception of faith, like we saw and we've been seeing for years in Oak Park, is only getting stronger as years pass. Take it from me, my generation, my experiences. It is quite hard to get through to people, even in Atlanta, an ostensibly culturally Christian city, people who, rather than not experience Christ directly, are often presented with this passive-aggressive, aloof, at worst, or else ambivalent Christian person. They don't show the love, they don't show what matters, they don't show how God acts in their life and their relationship. That's what we need to display as Christians and Christ lovers. Feeling that people inside and outside the church theoretically were Christians, but didn't show much community and love, didn't really make it all that worth our while to go back. I can't imagine being someone with less tenacity. It's too much to reduce this down to this time I know better, or look how great we are, look how bad they are. You can't reduce it down to an easy black and white answer. And it's also too much to reduce this down to this time I knew better. The struggles were different. It's really easy to let yourself and your schoolwork amount to being too busy for church, which is basically saying you're too busy for God, by the way. It's easy to have faith at school when you're in the building on a Sunday morning or bumming around Europe with Ben or whatever, but then you go back to your dorm and you spend 7 hours puzzled as to why your MATLAB script is complete trash, or back to your study abroad campus and bake in a room without AC and no church that speaks your language in town. You say, well, I'm done with this project or semester or degree. It'll come then. And you make yourself excuses. I've noted my proclivity to build mentor-mentee relationships with people and my over-reliance on authority figures and that dynamic a little bit. And I think some of it's like an accountability thing. I want someone to help me, to tell me what to do or how to be better. You know, I want to be the best me I can be. Some of it's veneration. Some of it is just the kind of personality I have, I think. But it's also hard to see many come and go. It made college hard not to have that dynamic to turn to regularly, kind of like I can just walk up to any one of you in church and probably strike up a conversation and talk for 20 minutes. I definitely struggled with isolation and being inconsistent at best. I also think it's worth noting that I have spent 4 of the last 7 years as a regular attendee or member of a church without a senior pastor. I've seen 4 small group leaders or Sunday school teachers here, home, leave in entirely preventable circumstances. And the man perhaps single-handedly the largest influence on and teacher for my faith in the past decade, the one who would call me out on my own transgressions, who would keep me honest, even on minor and pointless things, become one of the biggest hypocrites I'd ever had the pleasure of knowing and being judged by hardly 2 weeks after he officiated the wedding of 2 of my best friends. It makes it so difficult when you tie up your own relationship with God into your relationship with your friends, be they secular or faithful, or be they mentors in the church, out of the church, wherever. It's difficult, even with a fuller perspective than I had as a kid. I've kind of learned it doesn't stop. It's hard to hang on when all of that, for the most part, is completely out of my hands, especially the mentor stuff. But that's another reason why they aren't the end all be all. God is. Just when you learn, and just because you figure it out, or you think you have figured it out, how to keep your eye on God, or truly accepted that he's going to be. The valley of the shadows and the death isn't something that's ever going to go away. It doesn't make being a Christian easy just because God is there and you know about him. This life, it's meant for toil and struggle and pain. There's plenty of tragic and flawed people of faith to point to as examples, but as much as I stump for the importance of community and fellowship, this is a journey that requires you to grow personally and have personal action. It is times that are lonely and miserable. It contains multitudes of disappointment, betrayal, inadequacy, but it doesn't end with that. And you are not truly alone. That's what I've learned to do in a little over 2 decades on earth. The most important thing is to keep looking for God. That last day in River Forest, I recall us singing hymn 405, My Hope is Built on Nothing Less. I, of course, was a bit bummed that it wasn't 319, Shine Jesus Shine, or 649, Gather Us In, as I felt that these would be excellent little tongue-in-cheek ways to send the Pious Pirates off to college. Though I accepted it, seeing it as we have made a recording of us playing Cornerstone, the modern, kind of less awesome version of my favorite hymn, now, a few months back. It worked. The first hymn when we walked into North Ave, hymn 379 in their hymnal, My Hope is Built on Nothing Less. Again, this is something a non-Calvinist would call a coincidence. You might be thinking, wow, Jake, all that math at Georgia Tech. No wonder you remember all those numbers. Nah, not a chance. In fact, the reason I have a copy of Worship and Rejoice on my shelf is because after I gave Emma Wojak her college tour, I got sent along an Amazon gift card and I felt unworthy, shocking, I know, of that for a silly tour I would have done 10 times for free. So I bought myself a hymnal and picked the one from home because it seemed like it fit. I wanted something to put on my shelf and just open up and flip through. I promise, by the way, I tried my hardest to get North Ave to get a Jane Holstein edited one when they bought new ones, but I was outnumbered and that didn't happen. Seriously though, it's a wonder what a little dose of home will do to solidify Atlanta as one. There's 5 years of friendships, sermons, meals, sports, memories tied to the city, but it'll never have a decent hot dog stand. I think you see what I mean. I think the best thoughts I've read were written by one of my peers here at First Pres. So if you'll allow, I'll quote a passage from something Valerie Lundeen wrote the fall we both went off to college. I may not have gotten it at the time. I'm still working on being better at transitions, but I came to know it to be true as I learned how to put down new roots. Quoting now. I have quietly yet firmly come into the belief that home is not a place, but a state of being. I think that the places we call home are simply the geographical locations where we experience this piece of belonging. To me, home is so much more than where, who. It's the what and the why and the how, the answers to the questions we haven't even thought to ask. Home is an experience of a sliver of shalom, reconciliation and harmony of relationships among God, people, and creation. Shalom is why I think it's ill-fitting to tie something as beautifully encompassing, as divine as what we call home, to a spot on a map. The state of being I recognize as home can only be a reflection of heavenly home, just as any reflected image lacks the full depth of its source. Home on earth can't possibly encompass the scope of home beyond. That's what our eyes are on. That's why we build a relationship with God. After riding along, stewing on all of this, I'm now sitting at my desk, looking out the window towards the southeast. I wrote this yesterday, but it's also what I'm doing now. Bank of America Plaza, colloquially called the Pencil Building, rises in the distance. It's right there. At night, the tip is lit in spectacular orange. You all may not remember this anecdote from an old sermon around summer 2017 from Pastor Paul, but there was once a young foreign student he told us about who was welcomed with an invitation to a small group by a local church. He realized only after setting out that he didn't really know where he was going and didn't have any way to contact the people he was meeting. He just knew it to be at the base of a tall building. In the dusk, he followed the lighted tip of the building to its base, and there he found the church open and the people in front anxiously awaiting the arrival of their new guest. Now, I can't ever really recall confirming this to be a story about North Ave with Pastor, but giving his pre-existing friendship with our old senior pastor, Scott Weimer, who seems to have been quite a titan in the Presbyterian pastor world, I highly suspect it to be true. And if it's not, I choose it to be true. Because really, that's kind of a great way to describe how I made this place and this city my home. I looked up, followed a bit of intuition, some help from, back home, and a bit of divine guidance, and I stayed when I found what worked, despite it being tough. This is probably where I should tell you all that the time has come to move my membership to North Ave here in Atlanta. And I've been thinking about it for a while, but it's kind of what I need to do. Deep down, it is kind of a superficial thing, and that's why I've been putting it off despite getting badgered about it. But so much of high school and college is rushing and waiting, uncertainty and wondering, why do you put down roots? Where do you put them down? Are they going to be there in 4 years? Who's going to stay? Where are you going to be? Applying for schools, jobs. I always did tell myself, after all, that I would be going to Chicago after college anyways. But while things in post-college life are more definite, ironically, my time here has become indefinite. And that's kind of exciting, I guess, but it's also sad and weird to call Atlanta home. They do, after all, sing the doxology like they're falling down a flight of stairs in the middle of it. Faith isn't a solo trip. Sure, it's a lot of what's on your heart and your decisions to grow and develop in communion with Christ, but there's a reason we're a church and a body. And at the very least, as I wind up my time speaking, I want to thank you all for your role in my journey and my relationship with God, for teaching persistence, but also community, for giving me my first job and the opportunity to experience faith through worshiping together and making a joyful song. You all gave me the tools to survive the lonesome, lean times, the adapting times. For the mentors, the friends who've shaped my life so far and will continue to shape the rest of it. And for showing me what a true and healthy Christian culture means. And every time I come back, to not take any of it for granted. Home won't also be the solid red brick building at Quick and Lathrop. I have so much more I could have said about the nitty gritty of aspects of faith, of these, I could have rambled forever about getting conscripted into the choir, of my journey. But what I really had was honestly a quite short time. It also meant that a bunch of Pious Pirates jokes got cut because I didn't think that would be land. I didn't think they'd land. And all, of course, were tragic. With that, I turn the floor over to you. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, for somebody who's so young, you've had quite a journey. So I like particularly a couple of things you said, that faith isn't a solo trip, which I think given how things have gone in the pandemic, people have been at home and worshiping, finding a pastor that they like at some Texas place. And it can't be about that. It has to be about community. I love that you said that. Also, the other thing that you said that really sticks with me and resonates is how you don't start with Jesus, you start with love. And Jesus is love, but that Christians need to learn that. And I'm impressed that you have figured that out as part of your journey, that starting with love is important in faith.
Thanks. I'll take questions too if you got those.
What are you doing now as far as work?
I am a healthcare software consultant for a company called QGenda. They do doctor scheduling, room optimization, time tracking, compensation management. And I work with kind of as the go-between between our software dudes and our customers. So more the implementation and things like that.
What's that have to do with engineering?
That is a great question. It's a lot of logic. They hire pretty much only engineers for the role, a couple non-engineers, but it's a proprietary software, so getting it to actually work, the consultant side needs a lot of the I guess pattern recognition, logic, mathematical type stuff.
There's another question we missed.
Jake, I graduated as an engineer and never did one day's work in it. So
yeah, I figured out really fast that the time I spent in manufacturing was not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So
No.
I don't have a question, but it's Allison and Bill and Beverly, and we're all listening. And I just wanted to tell you how much we love you. You did a great
Thank you.
job.
I appreciate that.
Hey, Jake, it's Sally Kuzer. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering, what was the point at North Ave Church where you thought, okay, yeah, I can do this? You guys were, the four of you sitting in the back feeling like you weren't connected. Where did you finally hit a connection?
I think the biggest thing that did it for me is there was one, I think he was about 12 years older than us. His name was Ben, but he was like, you guys sit in the back every week. I'm going to come sit with you guys and talk to you before and after, and then start like, I guess this sounds weird, but like using his clout with other people to be like, ah, yes, my buddies, Jake and Jack and Tucker and Chris, like that, you know, like it helped to have someone to, I guess, facilitate the conversations. It's somebody who's kind of been around, and he was the one that helped us start the Sunday school class. He did most of the lessons, not all of them, because he was like a hospital chaplain. But when I said like Sunday schools and small group leaders like coming and going, that is something we have struggled with. Is like he had basically had a 30-hour-a-week job at the church that he was doing completely on a volunteer basis, and was like, hey, like this just doesn't work for me anymore. And like I don't know, North Avenue doesn't lack for money. Like all he wanted was some sort of a part-time role. So it was like tough, and it wound up happening like another time or two in their young adult and college youth, basically from 6th grade to like 24 years old is the same staff person or people. So we've seen a lot of turnover there, but I think that's improving and has been, I don't know, that's probably the way I've kind of contributed most to North Ave, I'd say, is like just being like a young college person and being like, hey, like this is a thing you guys should focus on, you know, or like here's how you help that.
Jake, this is Nancy.
Hello.
Hi, are you doing any music there?
Yeah, so I brushed past this a little bit, but I got an email about 4 weeks ago, as while I was at home, asking if I would come in to Mark Whiteside used to do this too, but like just like guide noodling on the piano while Jake plays the drums or whoever. Like audition sounds too strong, but you know, just like to come in and get known, I guess. And I was walking in to do that, and the organist was practicing, and he's playing a hymn, and he stops, and I was like, hey, like, do you know where Jakari is? That's our contemporary guy. I'm supposed to meet him to play, blah, 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 whatever. And Brian, the organist, goes, yeah, like he'll be right up. Like, I'm sure he's just around the corner. This is my practice time, and he'll get it next. And he proceeds to go and play Earth and All Stars, which is in the First Pres hymn book. It was a something that I don't know if we ever sang it, but anyways, Ben caught on to it, Ben Hancock. And Conrad, when they were doing the second Pious Pirates season for RSG. So I've known it quite well for a long time. And I commented afterwards, like, oh, that's Earth and All Stars. That was so cool. I'm glad I got to hear you play that. And he's like, if you know Earth and All Stars, you should join the choir. And I was like, well, you see, I haven't sung since 8th grade. And I kind of, not that I don't want to, but like, you know, like I'm a contemporary guy. And he was like, no, like that, tell me about, like, so you say you're contemporary, blah, blah, blah. So we take this left turn and we're talking about, what was I going to say? Oh yeah. He's like, so how do you know Earth and All Stars? I was like, well, I was in this band called the Pious Pirates, and it was like a theme song. And also that's what I said after you sang Gather Us In at Youth Sunday. And he was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy, because I told these guys to act like they were on a pirate ship. You should definitely join the choir. And I was like, you're really not going to let up. And he's like, yes, what are you doing Wednesday at 7? And I really didn't have an excuse, because I wasn't doing anything Wednesday at 7. And I felt bad, like, not going. And honestly, it's the most fulfilling thing I've done in church since I left First Pres. So
Oh, wonderful.
I have no regrets. I ducked out today after the anthem because I was like, can't be late, but
Did you, are you playing drums at all?
Off and on, their band for their contemporary, like the guy who's been playing drums, bass, or the guys who've been playing drums, bass, and guitar for years are like professional musicians who are way better than me. So I just kind of fill in when the drummer's out. So, but that's not very often. So mostly just the choir stuff.
I see you found another coincidence by meeting the organist.
Yes, I did.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Glad to hear.
Hey, Jake, what was the anthem today?
The anthem today was the Canticle of Fellowship.
Oh, nice. Good one. Yeah.
He had me on tenor the first couple weeks, and then we figured out that that's probably not the best move for my vocal.
Okay.
So.
Going down to the bass section, huh?
Yeah. I mean, my range is real small because I haven't sang in 12 years, but you know.
Those basses can be kind of rowdy. Just ask Chuck Foster.
Yeah. I did say because after the first practice, he's like, "Oh, what would it take to get you to come back?" And I was like, "The Canticle of Turning during Advent. I'll stay for that." Yeah, because that's one that you guys do every year. So I mean, I don't know. That was the first time
Absolutely.
Christmas was coming. So, but yeah,
That is so awesome. Excited for you.
thank you.
Any of your fellow college friends who went there still there with you?
It's a split. So 2 of us are still here. 2 of us are not. One has a job. I think no, he went to study in China. Actually, he's on a like exchange a job exchange program there. And then the other one is doing Georgia Tech, but online for a master's. So he's not on campus. And then the third guy, he's still on campus, wrapping up his master's. So he and I go every week.
Cool.
And we picked up some other people along the way too. So
Great.
I could so relate to what you were saying about, moving to a new place. I guess Wanda and I moved 12 or 13 years ago. And boy, it's not an easy transition to do that. So I could relate to that. The one thing that I think would surprise me was all of the stirrings that were going on for you, the ups and downs. You do a good job of appearing very level and stuff. So it was good to hear, like you said, that you look at one end of things and you don't realize all the things that happened in between. So thanks for sharing.
thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, I echo what Chuck said. You always seem cheerful, upbeat, pleasant, but it's just to show that we all have struggles inside that we don't show. And it's the love and support of other people that can get us through that. And of course, the love of Jesus, but Jesus works through people as well as in our own hearts and makes big difference. So thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that, Jake.
Thank you. I tried to show the dichotomy, not just in like the culture, like Oak Park versus Atlanta kind of thing, but also in the like people versus things you need to develop. And quite honestly, it was like the Nike swoosh in high school. Like the lowest was early. So if you're like, wow, senior year, like, man, I couldn't tell it all. Like that's because that was like the best year. I don't know. Like it obviously wasn't smooth, but I don't know. It'd be a little bit disingenuous to be like, yeah, like I was a mess even when I left for college. You know what I'm saying, right?
Well, it's given you some ability to empathize with those who are new in your church in Atlanta, especially those college kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to thank Jake for sharing, and his journey is a journey that we've all have been through. We continue as we make the long journey toward our ultimate home. Thanks, Jake, for being there. And next week we'll have Michelle Galindo talk about her journey. Thank you very much. See you all next week.